you ready to meet your higher self tonight? And are you ready to meet our special guest who is going to help us introduce us? I mean, I think our higher self is always there. Bunny will tell
Oh,
us.
yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get some advice on how to connect, with that self. So Bunny Michael is an artist, a spiritual and healing coach, a podcaster, and now author of this beautiful, wonderful book, Hello Higher Self, an outsider's guide to loving yourself in a tough world. And it's been built as a radical guide to self-love and self-acceptance, which is something that we talk a lot about in the club. So Bunny, we're so happy to have you here, and thank you for the book, and thank you for being here tonight.
Well, I'm so excited and happy and honored to be here too. Really, really happy.
So congratulations on your book,
Thank
baby.
you.
How's it feeling?
Thank you. It's an ever-changing experience. I think just like birthing anything into the world, whether it's like a creative project or anything, it has its own life and its own relationship with other people. And one of the biggest lessons for me is just being able to kind of surrender and allow that all to happen and be proud and connect with people about it. So yeah, I'm feeling really, really blessed and continually growing and learning from the experience for sure.
Yeah, it's an ever-evolving experience, isn't it? I
Yes.
think a book for like it's going
Yes.
to be around forever with new lessons
Yes.
and new readers and all that stuff. So I'm really excited to
Yeah.
share it and to share your story. And we're going to deep dive because at the moment for summer our theme is spiritual health. So I was kind of saying before we went live
Hmm.
that summer is a time really for us in self help and for most people, I think, to kind of maybe not be doing all the kind of exercises and homework, but more about like expansive thinking and
Hmm.
yeah, when considering how we connect to ourselves and the world and our place in it. So I think that's why this book is so perfect for now. But should we, before we start talking about how to connect with our higher self, should we start with like the easier stuff? Or maybe it's not easier, but the simpler stuff, which is where are you today? Let us know kind of where you are in the world and what does a day in your life look like?
Okay, well, I am in Kingston, New York, which is about 2.5 hours north of New York City. And I moved here a couple years ago from the city. I'm in my office right now. And my day really looks like I do a lot of stuff on social media. I share something every 6 days a week. So, what my routine normally looks like is I get up and I do meditation and I write in my journal. I write to my higher self, which we could talk about later, as a morning routine to kind of set the tone of the day. And then I write for about an hour after that, kind of channel creativity and information. I'll write, like, think of things that I'm going to write about on social media or any writing really, just for about an hour. And then I get ready, go to the gym, and come to my office and work on whatever other projects or film something for social media and stuff. And it's just a day full of a lot of creative channeling, honestly, just channeling information, messages from source, from love, and just trying to get myself in a place internally to be open to kind of downloading that information so I can share it and uplift somebody else in my life. And that's what I've sort of dedicated my life to, is just communicating love to as many people as I can every single day. And yeah, that's pretty much what my day looks like. And of course, hanging out with my dog. And my spouse and my friends, and really trying to balance all of that out, because I feel like all of that stuff also feeds the work, also feeds my passion, just finding the joy and the information and the lessons and like all these different experiences happening in my life. So continually growing, continually learning, and being on my own healing journey as well.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think you were saying to me that there's some kind of, because it sounds like your days are always quite different because it depends on kind of what's inspiring you and you're very creative. But do you have any kind of, well, you talked about meditation actually and journaling. So are those are things that you would do every day to kind of
Yes.
give yourself some routine and like ritual in
Yes.
when the rest of it is a bit of a more of a moving beast, maybe?
Yes, I have to kind of set the tone in the morning for me personally, because if I don't, I'm much less malleable by the world or whatever energy comes at me. And I always feel like if we leave it up to the world to make us feel good during the day, it probably isn't going to work all of the time. And so I really learned over the years that I have to prioritize that time every single day in the morning for me. Um, just to remind myself of who I really am and what's really important, and to just be kind of channeled into that frequency of love, that consciousness of love, where I feel like is the most empowered state to be.
Mm. Like in the introduction to your book, you talk about like we're pretty much confronted with an existential crisis almost like
Yeah.
before breakfast as soon as we're
Yes.
kind of opening the phone and kind of getting into the emails
Yes.
and things like that. And your
Yeah.
first chapter is actually about social media and kind of
Yeah.
the kind of pitfalls of that, I suppose, but also how to manage it, because you are someone who
Yeah.
works in social media and uses that as a
Hmm.
medium to share this lovely message of love and
Hmm.
healing. So it's do you feel like you have the balance right, or is that an ongoing process?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is an ongoing process. And that's why I have to continually be doing these practices so that I remember these things. Because it is so easy to get caught up in the hierarchy of social media and the status and the follower counts and the likes and all of that stuff. And since I do it every single day, and I really need to make sure that I am in that state of awareness. And it was actually social media that kind of prompted me to be doing this work in the first place, because social media can really highlight all of our insecurities in this way. And it was like right when social media and Instagram started that I actually started doing this work, prompted by being confronted with real feelings of insecurity and loss and existential crisis, and always feeling like I was lacking, always comparing myself to other people. And it was in those moments that social media actually really highlighted that for me, and I think it does for a lot of people. And often we don't really know what to do with that, and we can use that as like an awakening, or we could keep falling into the same traps. So I sort of took the thing that was really highlighting my own fears of inadequacy and used it in order to remind myself that I've always been adequate. So it's like I had to flip it on its head and use it for a higher purpose than what I was using it before. And I realized that's really the only way that I can use it.
I love that. So it's a tool, and
Yeah,
it's a
it's a
medium, isn't
tool.
it, for expressing
Yeah.
yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. And in so many ways it just highlights, what's already going on, and it in so many ways social media can be such a gift for so many people, and give so many people access that they didn't have before. So like anything else, it can be used in service of a belief that you aren't enough, or it can be used
Mhm.
in service of the realization that you are, and what am I going to share once I already know that. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. And so the question I love to ask everybody, which is this is nicely kind of seeped into it, is how would you describe your relationship with yourself right now? And maybe
Mm-hmm.
how has that changed since before writing the book, or even like
Mm-hmm.
over the last 5 years or so?
I think the way I would describe my relationship with myself is continually reminding myself of who I really am.
Mhm.
Because I think for a long time, I thought that who I was defined by my career success, my relationship, approval from my parents, whether or not I was feeling rejection or acceptance by the world, outside validation. And it really took me on a trajectory of just a roller coaster of up and down, depending on what was happening in my life. And I reached a point probably in like 2016 where I really just couldn't take it anymore. 'Cause I had like gotten out of a really bad relationship, a long-term relationship, going through a breakup. My career, I was doing music and art, and I felt like it wasn't going anywhere. Nothing was happening. I had a lot of trauma from my past, childhood stuff, and I really just didn't know if I could carry on. And I had a vision of my higher self come to me and tell me, you're enough. You always have been. And it was one of these out of body experiences and these really mystical experiences that felt like such a great relief and surrender. And in that moment, I was stepping outside of myself and I could see my other upset self and suffering. And I just was looking at myself with all of this compassion, like, you're enough. You don't need to do this to yourself anymore, you know? And I realized that all this validation I had been looking for outside of myself through all of these things was actually inside of me. You know, I had been looking outside when I was the one who needed to validate myself. I was the one who needed to tell myself that I was enough. And it was just immensely, this immense relief. And it was such a beautiful experience that I dedicated all of my work to remembering that experience and to honing in on that higher self vision and compassion and voice within me. And because I was already an artist sharing stuff on social media at the time, but I was constantly feeling upset and constantly, you know, feeling rejected or it's never good enough, et cetera, et cetera. I decided the only thing I could really share and put out into the world, at least at that point in time, was stuff from that perspective, from that loving voice. And I just kind of started making memes without any expectation of it. It was just something instinctual that I just felt like I needed to do. And it blossomed and created this whole other thing. And I realized, oh, this is my purpose. So when I say my relationship to myself is always trying to remind myself of who I really am. It's always getting back to that place within me where I know, okay, I am my higher self. I am enough. I was born whole. I am full of love. And there's nothing that anybody could do, no experience, no outside circumstance that can change that truth about myself. And how do I approach all these different areas in my life through that lens? So yeah, that's really, and it is a relationship. It's a relationship that you have to nurture every single day, like any other relationship. And you're in a relationship with yourself and you have to be a good partner.
Yeah, sure.
Um, yeah, so, you know, it's not always easy, obviously, and we're gonna have ups and downs even in that relationship, but as long as you prioritize it, as long as you have a bit of discipline about it, as long as you say, you know what, I'm worth this effort, it will drastically change your life.
Mm.
Drastically change your life. And it drastically changed my life.
Did you have a spiritual practice before that experience?
hmm I did. I mean, I had read a lot of books, you know, done a lot of yoga. I had done a lot of like plant medicine ceremonies, tried a lot of different healing modalities. But I think just like anything else, you can hear it a lot,
Yeah.
but it takes you actually having an experience within yourself where I think you reach a new level of awareness. And it's just one of those like mystical experiences, a divine moment. And I had glimpses for sure, but this one was really profound. And I
Mhm.
still do have many ones all of the time, especially if I keep nurturing this stuff. I actually feel myself kind of on the precipice of a whole other, like, more expansive understanding too recently. But yeah, but I think, you know, and we can get into this or talk about it later. I think what was an important factor in that wasn't that I realized something new about myself. It was actually an awareness of a remembering. It was actually
Mhm.
kind of like a returning to this part of me that already knew that, recognition of a truth that was already inside of me. So I think, yeah, and in a lot of ways, that's who I was born, who we are all born as. And we have these glimpses all of the time. And even when we can like talk about this stuff in groups, you know, like when you're hearing somebody else talk about like a mystical experience and you can kind of feel it, you get that like movement. It's like, even those things, you know, you can feel it. And there's not really words to describe it or a language that can, you know, encapsulate it. It just is. And yeah.
Yeah. So I was talking when I've kind of promoted this event or talking about this event, I've called it like an unlearning. We'll be like unlearning some,
Yeah.
or you'll be talking about unlearning. And I feel like that's what you're kind of talking about there. But it's like,
Yeah.
what is this? What does the term, so higher self, what does that
Yeah.
term mean to you, and how does
Yes.
it manifest in your life? Like, actually, you kind of
Yes.
you have talked about that a little bit just then, but
Yeah.
so for our group, some people, so we're reading this book at the moment, Celestine Prophecy, which is one that I've chosen and I've shared it. So some people in the group might not necessarily have chosen that book because it doesn't speak to them, because it's very a spiritual kind of adventure. And some people are finding it maybe some difficult to process, and they kind of are saying, I don't know how spiritual I am. I don't think I'm very
Mm-hmm.
spiritual. And I'm sure you
Yeah.
hear that quite a lot from people. So I wonder
Yeah.
if you can talk on yeah, the idea that do we all have a higher self? And how do we find it if so?
Yeah. So the term higher self has been used by so many spiritual traditions. It's not an original term by me by any means. But the way that I define it is who we are beyond the hierarchical conditioning that we were raised in and socialized in by our trauma, our socialization, our upbringing. So when we were born whole and never questioning whether we deserved care. And then we're socialized into a cultural system where we are taught that we actually have to prove our worth, that we aren't inherently worthy, that we need to show our value through our accomplishments, our possessions, our looks. And we're all raised into this worldly system. And the term that I use in the book is learned hierarchical beliefs, or LHBs. So the learned hierarchical beliefs are these beliefs that we are taught through our trauma and our socialization that taught us to see the world through this lens of some people are more worthy than other people based on any kind of arbitrary thing, whether, looks or, intelligence, whatever it is. And because we are taught to see the world through that framework, we spend so much of our life chasing that validation, constantly measuring ourselves up. Am I better than, or am I less than? And this is what causes so much of our own suffering, both on a personal level and I believe on a collective level. Because when you create a world where you teach people that they aren't inherently valuable, that they have to create their value based on these things, what happens is that people feel like they are lacking. And when people believe that they are lacking, they do things to try to feel like they are powerful. And so we end up creating a world of trauma because we're not telling people, actually, you're enough just for being who you are. And so the way that I see higher self, it can be used as a spiritual term. I see it as a spiritual term, but it can also be used as a psychological understanding or a philosophical understanding that there's this reality created by this 3D world, right? This world of forms, of personalities, of systems. And in that system, there are these truths where if you know, if you look this certain way, then you're beautiful. If your brain works this certain way, if you get a good grade on this test, then you're smart. And there's all of these rules, right, that are created through this and create this hierarchy. But that's actually not the truth of who we are. We are actually so much more than those limited systems and those limited beliefs. And connecting to your higher self is seeing the hierarchy that you've been conditioned with, these LHBs, these learned hierarchical beliefs, and becoming a witness to this stuff. Okay, I feel really insecure about my art, say, for example. I don't think I'm good enough to be an artist. And part of connecting to your higher self, I would say, is where do you think that thought came from? What does it mean to be a good artist? And who said that? And you start to unpack all of these things. And like I was saying before, when I had that mystical experience in 2016, and I heard that voice and compassion, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. I really want to understand this voice. And I started to realize that it wasn't just enough to say, oh, I just need to be more loving to myself. I actually had to understand where the loveless thoughts were coming from. And then when I started looking at my trauma and the things that I went through, say, with my parents, well, one of my major traumas was that they didn't accept me when I was gay as a teenager. And I started thinking about them, their experience, and what their LHBs were growing up. You know, who put the thought in their head that having a gay kid was wrong or made them bad parents. And then I started thinking about homophobia at large and how all of us are trained to think this way. And there's been so much suffering because of it. And it was actually really empowering because it gave me a vision of compassion, not to say that, you know, thinking this way was bad, but to understand what's going on in people when they hurt other people, you know, that were wounded, that were not taught that, hey, you have a gay kid, that doesn't make you a bad parent. And so for me, connecting to your higher self is really unpacking this stuff and noticing where those hierarchies are unconscious within your own thought system and throughout the day. And that's the unlearning part. You know, that's the like questioning, okay, I have this LHB from this experience or this way I've been socialized. And how can I start to question that and not make it an absolute truth?
Mm. And you say, and the book says, and I totally agree, and everyone will agree, that these LHBs like across all areas of our life. So
Yes.
is it so anything that you kind of are feeling bad about, so or feeling that you don't fit in, like you talk about being an outsider. So
Mhm.
so all these areas of life, whether that's like sexuality, like you say, or race, or
Yes.
size, or how able-bodied you are, all these things. It's kind of
Yes.
first of all acknowledging that you're having the feelings and then the
Mhm.
thoughts and then questioning where those thoughts came from, and
Yes.
then is the next stage then replacing those thoughts.
Yes, the next stage is replacing those thoughts, but I also think what's really important too is that we don't also turn those thoughts into something wrong with us either, you know? So it's like the higher self perspective really is the anti-hierarchy when it comes to judging ourselves, you know, because I think what often happens is in spiritual communities or healing communities, we have these glimpses of awareness, right? And we're so excited because we're like, oh, I'm going to heal and I'm going to like learn about this and unpack this racism and blah, 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 blah. And then when we make a mistake or when we have negative thoughts or when we are like putting ourselves down, we think, oh, I'm not doing a good job of my spirituality.
Mm,
I'm really messing up on my spirituality. And we don't realize that that's just another LHB. That's just another way to make ourselves less than.
mhm.
So it is like replacing the thought with the loving thought. That is definitely one of the steps, becoming witness to the thoughts that you have, the hierarchical thoughts. Um, investigating where those thoughts come from, replace those with loving thoughts. But you have to also be diligent to recognize that we don't then turn that into another way that we put ourselves down. So that's why, and especially attaining to this subject of spirituality, a lot of times LHBs can be very sneaky and very hidden under this guise of like, I'm more spiritual than you, or I'm more conscious
Yeah.
than you, or I'm more awakened than you, or you're not healed enough for me, or you're not spiritual, I am spiritual. Um, in the like world of healing and spirituality and wellness, there is a lot of this hierarchical perspective, both in how we judge ourselves and other people. And so it really is about dismantling that whole system and trying to see the higher self in other
Mhm.
people and recognize that, you know, we are actually all one. And that way, you know, we're staying in that consciousness of love. um yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, and I love in the book that you share your in each chapter and for each area you share one of your own story. And in some,
Mhm.
and I think it's in the mental health chapter, you say, "Oh, I failed at healing,"
Yeah.
and it's just like, which is just kind of like it's kind of funny, but obviously it's not funny when you're in it feeling it. But I think
Yeah.
looking back, you can probably say, you know, that like who says what's when you're fully healed, like tick, that's not, it's not
Yeah.
something to tick off, is it? Like you say,
Yeah.
it's a process, not a goal.
Yeah, I say it's a practice, not a goal, because,
Practice, yeah.
well, we're constantly being confronted. We're living in this world, right? So it's not like once we like tap into this state of awareness that we're not then bombarded by the thought system of the world. So it's like a constant negotiation. It's a constant reminder. It's a constant like moment to ask yourself, okay, how do I channel into the consciousness of love right now? Like, what would love tell me to do right now?
Mm,
And I think that that looks different at different times in our life. And sometimes it's walking away, and sometimes it's saying yes. And sometimes, but I think that we have this inner compass of love, which I would call our higher self, like this inner compass of love within us that is very, very wise, that we have not even begun to really fully tap into that power. And we're only, I think, as human beings in a lot of ways, like really starting to like channel into that. And we can even more even now, and in all of these in these different practices, and really just taking the initiative and trusting ourselves and trusting that voice. you know my friend, I was talking to my friend the other day, who, and I had also had the similar realization. I was sharing it with them because they're going through a breakup, and they were with somebody, and they kind of, when you break up with somebody, you don't really realize how bad it is till you have some space. And they kind of were realizing, oh, this person was actually abusive, and they're, realizing this now that they're away from it, and they're so mad at themselves because they were
mm,
with that person. And how can I trust myself again? How could I ever trust myself again? And I said, you know what? That's actually not what it is, because every time I hung out with you, you would be complaining about this person. There was so many red flags. What it is now, that what now you must learn is that you can trust yourself.
mm,
Because what I think, you weren't listening to that voice, actually. You
yeah.
weren't trusting it. And I think that's the case so much of the time. We're so much wiser than we realize. And
Mm,
it's really about prioritizing that time to connect. I call it higher self, but whatever you want to call it, but to connect to that wisdom of love. And whether you're a spiritual person or not, I think you can recognize that inner wisdom is there. And you can't
yeah.
really put a name to it. It's not really something you can like explain really, but you can sense beyond, and it's a sense beyond the five senses.
Mm. And I think most people will relate to that as well. Like that you can sense when you're drifting away from it. So even if, like you
Yeah.
say, even if you can't identify exactly what's happening, generally we kind of like we talk about like people my age who are like talking about midlife crisis and things like that. It's like that little voice that you're kind of like ignoring until you can't ignore it anymore. That's the kind of
Hmm.
that's your,
Yeah.
or I might call it intuition, for instance.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So learning to
Hmm.
listen to ourselves, and I suppose, is it getting quiet enough to hear those messages?
To download that information too,
Mm,
making yourself available to downloading that information. And, that's what I was talking about. That's my time is in the morning. But I think that, we all can do things in our life and prioritize that time to connect to our higher selves, or connect to, you know, our our inner wisdom, our intuition, whatever word you want to use. I like the term higher self because it helps me remind myself that it's still me, but it's just like a higher consciousness, and in the sense I just mean like beyond the consciousness of the world, vision, which I would call love,
mm,
too. Like having that love perspective really is like, you know, that bird's eye view,
mm. Yeah.
you
So
know.
one of my next questions was, how did you get so wise? But I feel like that's kind of answered the question. But also, do you think,
Yeah.
because you kind of touched on the idea of difficulties in childhood and
Mhm.
trauma. Do you think that, I suppose, not necessarily resilience, actually, maybe it's more compassion, like compassion for yourself, compassion for others? Do you think that has come from, or you can tell me, what has that come from, previous experiences and taking the lessons from those?
Yes, and I think, one of the important realizations that I had in this journey was when I looked back at my trauma, like when I looked back at difficult experiences, or when my family rejected me for being gay, and it was extremely painful. I recognized that there was this inner part of me, even then, even as a child, that knew that they were wrong for doing what they were doing, that could recognize the lovelessness in that experience. And I realized that that was my higher self. And even though the people that were supposedly the ones that were there to protect me, that there was actually something in me that was my protector. And that was love. And I was full of it, even then. And that was really eye-opening for me. And I think that everybody who's been through a trauma can see, can feel that, knows that inside of them, there was all these alarm bells going off. We have a compass of love that says, no, this isn't okay. That says you deserve better. The issue is that a lot of times our world doesn't help people from the get know that they're inherently valuable no matter what. And so when we have difficult experiences, like we go through abuse or trauma, it puts that LHB in our head that, oh no, we don't actually deserve love. And Gabor Mate says that trauma isn't actually the experience, it's the story after. It's the narrative of what happened to you, right? So I think it's never too late for us to look at our trauma and see that our higher self was with us the whole time, and that we have this love within us that is unshakable, actually. And we can see that truth and recognize that truth has always been in us. And because it is our nature. That is our nature. And it's a great feeling to know that you belong to yourself, and that we all have this within us. And it's sad when people are in a place in their life where they've been so misguided that they can't get to that place inside. It is, but that doesn't mean that you can't.
Yeah. And I like you say it's never too late. It might just take a bit longer to unpick, maybe, or do the
Yeah.
unlearning if you spent a lot longer in that state of mind. So when you work with,
Yeah.
because you work as a coach as well, and you have your brilliant podcast, and when you're like speaking to people, what is, I mean, I think I get the impression that from your book and from your work, it really comes down to I don't feel enough
Yeah.
is a lot of is the kind of root problem for most people. Is that,
Yeah.
would you agree? And what's the most common, where do you start, I suppose, when somebody comes to you?
Well, a lot of all I really do is remind people that they are whole just for who they are, that they're enough just for who they are. And how do we look at this situation through that lens? And when I help people get to that place, by talking about, okay, what are the LHBs that are part of this narrative here? What are you telling yourself? Say somebody's going through a really bad breakup. Well, underneath that, well, I'm going to be alone forever. Okay, well, where did that thought come from? Well, it's so funny. Like, so much of our thoughts come from like pop culture, for example. Like watching rom-coms as children, watching Disney movies as children, and being told that your whole purpose here is to find this one person that will complete you. And that really and you might say, oh, I don't have that because I know the Disney movies, blah, blah, blah. But actually, that is underneath this really, really big fear of being incomplete. And really realizing that fear actually doesn't get solved when you find a partner either. Like, that's actually not the solution. So it's like we go from, I'm upset about the breakup to I'm afraid I'm not going to be complete without this person, to then realizing even if I met somebody else, I still wouldn't be complete. Well, what would it take for you to feel complete? What is that? Like, is it the boyfriend? Is it the job? We live in a world where people have so much. Some people have so much, and it's not enough. It's not enough. We live in a world where where there's billionaires who have more money that they could ever spend, that their children, grandchildren, great grandchildren could ever spend, but they feel like they cannot pay workers a living wage. And that is the result of a world created in LHBs where it's literally never enough. The outside will never be enough to fill the inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you realize that, it's not that you don't try to get the things that you want, or you don't try to get the relationship, or you don't try to get the job, or you don't try to get the money. It actually empowers you to get that stuff because you're not looking at it to complete you. You're not putting this pressure. You're not taking the thing that you love and turning it into a tool to put yourself down with. And we sabotage so many relationships when we give other people that power, because we lose sight of who that person even is. They just become the thing that's going to make you feel good about yourself or not feel good about yourself. And we actually lose their higher self. We can't see their higher self anymore because we're just projecting our lack onto them. And so, it's when you realize that stuff and you realize how free you are, actually, it's like this real profound sense of freedom, and it doesn't make you enjoy things less or care about people less. It actually makes you really care about people because you can actually appreciate them for who they are and actually see them and actually have full experiences and really appreciate your job and love the process and love creating art, because you're not using your art. You're not turning the thing you love into something that will hurt you. So yeah, I think that's what I try to do when I'm working with people or at the podcast, is just kind of, let's unpack where this is coming from. Let's investigate the cultural LHB. Let's talk about, find out, what experiences may be contributing to this, and how can I replace this thought, and how can I remind myself that I'm whole? Because when you reframe that and when you tell yourself that, it sounds super corny to tell yourself, I'm enough. I always have been. I'm beautiful. I'm full of love. Like, I'm amazing. Like, it sounds corny, and it's hard for people because we're so not used to it. We're so not used to telling ourselves that, but we need to hear it. We needed to, when kids, that kids need to have nurturing and encouragement. Everybody accepts that. And then they think, oh, because you are an adult, you don't need it anymore. But that's not true. And we are the ones that can give ourselves that. And when we give ourselves that, it's much easier to give it to other people too.
Yeah, 100%. We read the book Self-Compassion, and we talk about self-compassion a lot in the club, and the idea that when you're compassionate and loving to yourself, then it's actually easier, and you're much like better at seeing it in other people and being compassionate for other people. But yeah, you're so right as well about the way we treat children and puppies, like, and our pets, right? We kind of like tell them how wonderful they are because we want them to feel good. So yeah, I love that. And
Yeah.
it must feel amazing for you then when you're working with people and they kind of get it. That moment when it probably isn't a moment. I'm imagining like a kind of like light bulb going off, but it's like, I think people in this group as well, and even me, it's like when that time when you kind of like, it's when you stop worrying about something and then you notice you're not worrying about it. And it's like, oh, previously I would have done that. Or you can kind of give yourself a pat on the back for maybe letting something go or moving on from something.
Yeah. And you know what, honestly, too, just to have somebody tell you you're enough is so powerful. Just to have, somebody tell you, hey, like, you are doing an amazing job. Like, you're being very courageous. You're like, you're facing a hard thing because you're growing. Like, this is a new phase for you. Like, trust it. You got this. Like, it helps so much. And that's why we have to tell our friends this too. I mean, I say this too, like, make sure you tell the people in your life this too, especially if you want to receive it. because we need it so much. I mean, this world is hard enough. we
Yeah.
as it is to navigate, and you'd be surprised how much easier things are. And I say this a lot, that whatever you have going on in your life right now would be a lot easier if you were being nice to yourself.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's really just that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like if we're hard on ourselves, that doesn't work. We might as well try being nice to ourselves, right? And I love
Yeah.
how you start all the chapters in the book, you kind of start with the me sentence, which is I've just opened friendship here, and then kind of what your higher self might say. So me, I have no friends, no one ever calls or texts me. Your higher self might say, have you called or texted anyone? In order to have friends, you have to be a friend. So it's that kind of like
Yes.
wise version of you, isn't it? um,
Yes.
and so can we dive into the chapter on spirituality then?
Yes. Yes.
As
Of course.
I'd love to do that. And David, if you are listening in the background, hi David, our head of tech. If you want to share the prompts, because I'd love people to see those, because this is the kind of thing in the book. Each segment, then you have the kind of a story, and then how your higher self might show up for this area of your life, or in this area of your life, and then also different exercises. And in the spirituality one, I love the prompts that you share. So I thought we could just share them. I'm going to share them in the chat. David's going to share them in the chat tonight, just as a way to get people thinking about things. Because like when you just said then about just to tell yourself you are like being kind to yourself is a way to try something. So are you doing okay? Can you still hear us?
Yeah. I just wanted to change
Okay.
my phone. Sorry, they're dying.
Okay.
Okay. Got it. We're all
No
good.
worries. Um, yeah, so the journal prompts are going to be things like it's kind of ways to just like think about ideas of things you can do or things you might say to yourself or other ways of thinking. So I think people have a look at those guys and see and take those away with you. But then in the chapter on spirituality, you're kind of talking about, we kind of touched on it already, the idea of that, I don't know, toxic positivity or like sometimes spiritual bypassing, so that
Yes.
people can be like, oh, that's not spiritual to talk about war,
Yes.
or that's not
Yes.
spiritual to talk about racism. Let's only talk
Yes.
about like good vibes only. And
Yes.
we do talk a lot about kind of like choosing to be happy or choosing the positive or choosing
Mhm.
to see a silver lining. But
Yeah.
I think it is interesting to talk about. Do you want to talk a little bit about the idea of
Yeah.
toxic positivity and why that isn't helpful?
Yes. And one of my favorite quotes, and I think it was Marianne Williamson who said this, or when I first heard saying it, was there's a difference between denial and transcendence.
Mhm.
And when you're leading a path of love, it is very important to recognize where there's lovelessness. Because in order for us to be compassionate to ourselves, we have to realize that we are one consciousness and we are one family. And there's a difference between um, when you are confronting, and like going back to the learned hierarchical beliefs. People might say, oh, racism isn't something that I really want to focus on because it's not directly impacting my life. But I would say it is, no matter who you are, because when you live in a world that tells you you aren't inherently worthy based on this, this, and this, it doesn't really matter the form of that learned hierarchical belief. It's all based on the same illusion that we're not all inherently worthy. And so noticing where LHBs come up are so important, or where you have unconscious biases is so important to your own healing. Because what you're trying to do is get back to that higher self perspective. And you have to realize that you seeing through those unconscious biases is you seeing through that lens of hierarchy.
Mhm.
So it is essential to your spiritual growth and your healing to notice where that hierarchy exists within your own unconscious thought system. Because unlearning that stuff, even if it's about whether it's about race or transphobia or whatever, you might not think is really about you, but it is. Because it's all based on the same system. It's all the same hierarchical framework that is
Mhm.
impacting how you see yourself. It's impacting your happiness. It's impacting your peace, and it's impacting the peace and the happiness of the world. And when you do that inner work of noticing this stuff, and this is where a lot of people get trapped because it's not easy to look at that stuff. You know, of course, nobody wants to think, hey, I'm racist, or I have racial bias. I mean, it does not feel good to notice those things about yourself or to unpack that. No, of course not. But the whole point is that you are not the conditioning,
Mhm.
right? Like, we are not our LHBs. We're our higher self. And so when you can see that your conditioning actually isn't who you are, whether it's about race, whether it's about fat phobia, whether it's about, you know, whatever hierarchical beliefs that have been conditioned inside of you, when you see that you are not them, it is much easier for you to look at this stuff because you know, hey, like this stuff this is learned behavior. These were not
Mhm.
ideas that I was born with. This is stuff that was put into my head by people who were also taught that, right? And it's actually very empowering for me to realize that I'm not that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's hard for people to acknowledge social privilege because they don't know that they are enough without it, you know? And that's what's actually getting in their way is them actually not realize it's not about disempowering them. It's actually showing them their true power, which
Mhm.
isn't defined by social privilege, which isn't defined by, you know, how you're perceived by a racist system or whatever. So it actually is like extremely empowering for you to realize you're not your LHBs, and it's very freeing, and it's just it feels really good, you know. And it's of course it's not always easy, just like healing's not always easy, you know. When you realize it's just like anything else, like you know when you realize how a childhood wound shows up, and you're like, oh God, like you're just
Yeah.
kind of like you're like having a fight with your partner or something, and then you're like, oh gosh, I was triggered. And you got that feeling where you're a little embarrassed, you're kind of mad at
Yeah.
yourself. But then you have this wave where you're like, wait a minute, like, let me give myself some compassion, you know, this isn't my fault.
Yeah.
Like, this is because of something I've been through or something I've been taught or made to believe about myself. And you give yourself grace that helps you free yourself from the imprisonment of these LHBs, whether it's from a trauma or society or whatever.
Yeah, sure. Richard's actually said in the chat, he usually it's kind of like when you get that feeling of like, ah, so that's why I'm like that or like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're like, it's the realization. But then like you say, the kind of self-compassion of like,
Yeah.
well, now I know. So it's like now what do I do with that, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's also like, you know what? Like, it's pretty cool that I'm seeing this.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
actually, like, it's pretty cool that I'm noticing this because I never noticed it before. And what does that mean? That means I'm like awakening even more.
Yeah, I like that. So it's kind of turning it into yeah, like you say, it's growth, isn't it? Spiritual growth,
Yeah. Hmm.
self-development. That's what we're all here for. I'm just
Yeah.
going to put the journal prompts in the chat. There we go. So these are from the book, guys, the journal prompts, and they're just something to think about as we're just kind of continuing our chat on spirituality. And if anyone has any questions, then please let us know in the chat because we've got 10 minutes left. Um, in the chapter then, Bunny, you talk about there's not a particular way to be spiritual. And I like the chat and I like the story you shared about your partner, I think your spouse now, that when you first met, you were like, oh, they're not spiritual enough for me because well,
Yeah.
they're not spiritual because they don't meditate or they
Yeah.
don't do yoga. And you kind of were like, not proven wrong, but you learned that there's different ways to be spiritual.
Yeah. And it's funny when people say that, you know, that somebody's not spiritual when it's like, if we're all spirit, then how are somebody not
Yeah.
spiritual? But yes, I realized that their spirituality looked different. It looked like going on walks by themselves. It looked like their relationship with their plants. It looked like them just
Mm,
channeling into that that other state of consciousness through their own ritual, through their own way. And they might not have used the same language, but of course they have a relationship to that. And I think we all do. It's just like we're used to, we either prioritize it or we don't. Because I do believe, you know, we are not confined by these forms, and none of us are. And so, yes, I think it's really important not to get too caught up in, well, this is more spiritual than that, or this is what spirituality looks like. It doesn't look like this. Because really it's all just, again, all just about connecting to higher self, to love, and whatever form that is, that's all that really matters. Whatever tool you use, it's not the tool. It's like where it takes you within yourself. And which is just, for me, just a returning back to the awareness of love, to that inner higher self consciousness that's always there. It's just all just right here.
Yeah. So we all might connect in different ways. Or it might look different on different people.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So bringing your higher self to spirituality, then, if we're thinking about spirituality as it doesn't need to be something we're good or bad at. It's just like, it's like you say, it's like we're all spirit. So we are all spiritual. So we talked about toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing a little bit. And then, your spiritual path is not the same as everyone else's. And that's a good thing. And so so you are a big fan of, like, use all the rituals, all the routines, whatever, try everything, or try lots of things, and choose what works for you.
Yes. And, because we all have a different relationship to language. We all have a different relationship to aesthetic. We all have a different relationship to, like, tone. I mean, it's like there's so many different things that we like. So whatever gives you that feeling is valid. I was like holding on to a crystal earlier, and I was thinking to myself, is this crystal really giving me this feeling, or am I telling myself this crystal is really giving me this feeling? And then I was like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Really. The crystal is doing the job.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, the form of it is so much less important than knowing the intention behind it. And when you're worried about the way other people are doing it, you're not there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like you also say, I think in the book, if you're worried that someone's judging you, you're already judging them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And that's one of those kind of like, oh, noted.
Yeah.
Noted.
For sure. Yeah.
And then I like this number 4. So thinking of your higher self as a spiritual concept is wonderful, but it's okay if you don't. And does that mean that it doesn't need to be complicated, or maybe don't overthink it?
Yeah, and also that too, that's also recognizing that a lot of people have different experiences with spirituality and religion. A lot of times they have trauma around those experiences. A lot of them have been in situations where a lot of that same rhetoric or that same language was misused to represent something that under the guise of love really wasn't. And so some people just really don't like that terminology. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter the language that you use or the label that you put on it. And sometimes even saying being your own best friend is, like, helpful enough to people. So I guess I just really want to be super to recognize that language is incredibly limiting, that the labels are incredibly limiting. And ultimately, we're talking about something that cannot be really defined with, like, the forms or the words of this world. So how it feels right in your heart is right. And I don't think anybody, including me, really knows that. That is like an intimate truth within you that that nobody else can really claim to know better than you. And so I think we, a lot of times in spirit, especially with, like, spiritual leaders and stuff, like, claiming to know the truth and it must be this way and that way. And that's where I think we again fall into the danger zone of where LHBs can be really sneaky, and you're not really aware that you're falling into this, like, I'm not enough without this. I'm not enough until this. I'm not enough unless I get there. And that's really what I'm trying to hone in on, changing that perspective.
Yeah, wonderful. So finally, then, just to close, at the end of the chapter on the spirituality, you share a meditation for accessing your higher self. So I just wondered if you could just talk us through that. Like, we don't need to do the meditation now because we're running out of time, but just maybe talk us through how you what does your meditation practice look like? Do you have a what's it called, a formal practice, or as to just what you were saying, is it whenever you can kind of get quiet?
I have a formal practice. Well, I mean, formal in the sense of I do it, I guess.
Like you said earlier, a little bit of discipline if needed sometimes, isn't
A
it?
little
So
bit,
yeah.
a little bit of discipline, where mine just looks like really channeling into my higher self, meaning, closing my eyes, most probably putting on music to kind of focus in and being aware of my breath, and having an affirmation to that is a channeled higher self affirmation, a message from my higher self that I can just repeat internally over and over. And it just gets me to that place within myself where I'm connecting and channeling into that inner wisdom that we were talking about. And another thing that I also do, I don't know if you would call it a meditation, I guess you could call it a meditation, is sometimes I just close my eyes, put my hand on my heart, take a deep breath, and ask myself what I need today. Like, what do I need today? And I guarantee you, like, when you actually ask yourself that, you will get an answer. And it's normally something like being compassionate with myself, being patient, you know, doing some joy, some gratitude, whatever it is. It's like, what do I really need today? But we don't ask our higher selves that. We don't ask ourselves that very often. So yeah, I have like a meditation practice where I just kind of get quiet and say an affirmation and set a timer. I like the setting a timer thing because for me personally, I really like structure. It really helps me. And so like I'll know in advance there's time for this. So I don't have like that stress talk, oh, I'm going to be late, blah, blah, blah. So I like the setting the timer so you can plan it out and know how long it's going to take. And then I just, get quiet, and whatever it looks like, it's what it looks like. Again, we can have that voice in our head that says, you're not doing this right. You suck at this. This isn't good enough. You didn't do it good enough. It didn't count, all of those voices. And it's really just, that's why I like the affirmation too, because it's so as those thoughts come in, you can say, I don't remember exactly what the one was for this meditation because there's a few in the book, but
Page 284, this one.
Got it. It says, I am a representative of love. I am my higher self. And I think just saying like, I am a representative of love. I am my higher self is just, I think it really, it's like plugging in to that power. And even if some cynicism pops up in your head, you say it again, you say it again. And it really helps. And then you can also obviously say the affirmations during the day too. And I do all of the time because I need it.
And do you say it out loud do you say it out loud sometimes, or is it in your head usually?
During the meditation, I say internally, but I do say affirmations out loud. I do, especially if I'm noticing myself getting stressed or anxious about something, because life happens and things get thrown at you, and you're doing something new or unknown, you have the fear. And then it's like, I'm a representative of love in this situation. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. You know what I mean? It's like you're having social anxiety. I'm a representative of love. I am my higher self. You're like applying for a job. I'm a representative of love. I am my higher self. And and you're grounded in that. And so it's like, it's like you're just plugging back in to who you really are.
Yeah, you can't really argue with that, can you? Even though some of us might try. I like when you say it's a relationship with yourself. So give it, prioritize it and nourish it and give it what it needs. Okay, brilliant. Okay, everybody, your homework then is to do that meditation and ask yourself what you need, I think is a
Yes.
great way to start tomorrow, maybe.
Yes.
Bunny, thank you. Such a pleasure to meet you
Thank
and
you.
have you here with
Thank you.
us.
Thank you
And
so much for having me. It was great.
thank you for this book. I love it. It's brilliant. And thank you for everything you do. And thank you guys for being here. And yeah, stay in touch with us. I think David's shared Bunny's channels. So stay in touch with Bunny and I on Instagram and all that jazz. And have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
See you soon, guys.
Bye.
Bye bye.